I'm proud to be here today to announce the launch of New Jersey United for Marijuana Reform. New Jersey United for Marijuana Reform is a new campaign working in New Jersey to legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana for adults. The partners that make up New Jersey United for Marijuana Reform are not ones that you would always expect to see working together. We are prosecutors and civil rights advocates. We are law enforcement professionals and doctors. We are Republicans, we are Democrats, libertarians, and everything in between. We are African American, we are Caucasian, we are Latino. We are from North Jersey, we're from Central Jersey and South Jersey. We are New Jersey. And we're united here today to help put an end to the tremendous harms caused by our marijuana laws, to create jobs, increase public safety, and generate significant revenue to reinvest in our communities. As a mom, it troubles me that my children are growing up in a New Jersey where marijuana is not regulated, where marijuana can be purchased on street corners without control. I want my kids to grow up in a New Jersey where we, as responsible, law-abiding adults, can control access to marijuana, where we can invest in effective drug abuse prevention strategies, and where I can teach my children about the harms of abusing drugs without the police getting involved. I'm passionate about being a great health coach and a loving mom. When complicated issues arise at work or at home, I strive for a sensible yet practical and common sense approach. Unfortunately, New Jersey's current handling of marijuana policy does not meet these criteria. It's time to move away from our failed approach to marijuana and build a safe, controlled, and regulated system. Prohibition has failed. It's time for some common sense. I'd like now to turn it over to some key partners of New Jersey United for Marijuana Reform, who can tell you a bit more about why they are part of this campaign. First up is Udi Ofer, Executive Director of the ACLU of New Jersey.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Udi Ofer. I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of New Jersey, and I'm here today on behalf of the ACLU and the tens of thousands of ACLU supporters who call New Jersey home. Today, the ACLU of New Jersey and our allies in the civil rights, law enforcement, medical, and faith communities are coming together to launch a new coalition with a common goal: to tax, regulate, and legalize marijuana for adults in New Jersey. We are launching this coalition because the status quo has failed. We are launching this coalition because the time has come to begin fixing our criminal justice system by ending unjust marijuana arrests. The groups and individuals in this coalition come from different perspectives, but we can all agree that it's time for New Jersey to end the harms caused by thousands of senseless marijuana arrests a year. New Jersey makes more than 21,000 marijuana arrests a year. That means that New Jersey makes tens of thousands of arrests a year for an activity that the last 22 years of US presidents have admitted to engaging in. And in New Jersey, not all communities are treated alike when it comes to marijuana arrests. Black New Jerseyans are nearly 3 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than white New Jerseyans, despite similar usage rates. New Jersey taxpayers spend more than $127 million a year enforcing this system. That's more than $1 billion spent by New Jersey taxpayers on marijuana arrests in this past decade alone. And this is despite the fact that 111 million Americans have tried marijuana in their lives, and a majority of Americans believe that marijuana should be legal. It is clear that the status quo has failed. It is time for a new common sense approach. It is time to take marijuana out of our parks and out of our street corners and into licensed stores for adults. It is time to stop turning otherwise law-abiding Americans into criminals. It is time to stop arresting New Jerseyans for an activity that a majority of Americans believe should be legal. It is time to replace the failed status quo with a new, safe, controlled, and regulated system. Making marijuana legal for adults 21 or older will create a controlled system with restrictions on sales and access. It will free up law enforcement for real priorities like violent crimes, and it will generate more than $100 million in new annual revenue that could go back to New Jersey's neediest communities. New Jersey United for Marijuana Reform is dedicated to pushing for the next generation of marijuana laws here in New Jersey. We will learn from what has worked in other states, and we will learn how to do it even better. Our goal is to create in New Jersey the safest, most effective, and fairest system possible. We will do so by educating and mobilizing New Jerseyans from Cape May County to Sussex County and all in between, and by working with a diverse group of organizations and individuals across political lines and across geographic boundaries. It is time to end tens of thousands of wasteful and discriminatory marijuana arrests, while at the same time build a safe, controlled, and regulated system. Justice calls for nothing less. Before we turn it over to the rest of our steering committee, I also want to recognize that many organizations and individuals have endorsed this campaign already, and this list is going to grow, we have no doubt, in the weeks and months to come. But right now, the list of endorsing individuals and organizations include Reverend James A. Duncans, senior pastor at the Shiloh Baptist Church of Port Norris in Vineland; Dominic Bucci, retired New Jersey police lieutenant; Jack Cole, retired New Jersey state lieutenant and co-founder and board chair of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and LEAP is also a steering committee member of the coalition; Tim Daddick, who's a retired NYPD officer, Vermont police chief, and a New Jersey resident; and then the following organizations: Help Not Handcuffs, Marijuana Policy Project, New Jersey Citizen Action, New Jersey Libertarian Party, New Jersey Policy Perspective, New Jersey Tenant Organizations, New Jersey United Students, and NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, New Jersey. Thank you so much.
Next is John Henry Barr, President of the New Jersey Municipal Prosecutors Association and a municipal prosecutor in Clark, New Jersey.
Good morning. My name is John Henry Barr, and I am the president of the New Jersey State Municipal Prosecutors Association and a prosecutor in Clark, New Jersey. Last year, the Municipal Prosecutors Association voted to support the legalization and regulation of marijuana. While the Prosecutors Association is not officially supporting or opposing any particular marijuana legalization efforts or legislation, I am here today as an individual with 14 years of experience as a municipal prosecutor, and in my experience, and the experience of many other municipal prosecutors, the prohibition of marijuana is not working and is doing our state and our country more harm than good. From a law enforcement perspective, New Jersey's more than 21,000 marijuana arrests per year are creating multiple problems. There are significant backlogs in our drug testing laboratories because police must prove that every joint seized from a person is in fact marijuana. That creates delays in our municipal courts because simple cases are taking longer and longer to be ready for trial. My own support for legalization and regulation crystallized after prosecuting a case in 2013 when I found myself, the defense attorney, the arresting officers, and the court system spending thousands of taxpayer dollars, countless hours of police time off the streets, and days of court resources to prosecute the possession of a single marijuana cigarette. When so much of our precious time is spent on a case like that, it is plainly obvious that we need to end this failed system of prohibition so that police, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges can be focusing their time on serious crimes. I have also served my community as a volunteer EMT for 10 years. In that capacity, I have taken dozens of unfortunate patients to the hospital in an ambulance because of drug overdoses. The drugs that caused these overdoses were illegal narcotics like heroin, certain prescription drugs, and most commonly, alcohol. I have never taken anyone to the hospital in an ambulance due to a marijuana overdose, nor do I know of any other EMTs or paramedics who have. The only time marijuana plays a gateway role is when the drug dealers on our street corners use marijuana sales as a gateway to selling New Jerseyans harder drugs. By regulating marijuana, over time, we will strike a blow to the illegal market and take this easily accessible substance out of the hands of our children. The legalization and regulation of marijuana will not be a cure-all, and we will continue to have to solve problems as they arise. However, I am confident that legalization will eliminate far more problems, and the savings that will be realized will dwarf any drawbacks. Right now, the only real winners in this system are the drug dealers. The government is spending money on a pointless offense when it should be generating revenue from it instead. Finally, I want to point out that I am a lifelong fiscally conservative Republican who has served as a municipal prosecutor in 2 Republican-controlled towns. Republicans, like myself, are against the wasteful spending of taxpayer dollars on government programs that do not work and are not necessary. The war on marijuana is a government program that does not work and is not necessary. It is time for a new approach to New Jersey's marijuana laws.
Next, we have Richard Smith, President of the NAACP New Jersey State Conference.
Good morning. Good morning. I bring you greetings on behalf of the NAACP New Jersey State Conference, its officers, executive committee, and members of the 41 branches across the state of New Jersey. Founded in 1909, the NAACP is the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization. From the ballot box to the classroom, the thousands of dedicated workers, organizers, leaders, and members who make up the NAACP continue to fight for social justice for all Americans. We are proud to stand here today with this diverse group of individuals and organizations. New Jersey United for Marijuana Reform defies expectations. We are clergy, law enforcement, civil rights, medical, and criminal justice reform organizations and individuals. We are New Jerseyans, and we all stand united in support of reforming our state's marijuana laws, and make no mistake, we are growing. We are here today to begin moving away from New Jersey's failed approach to marijuana. Our state makes tens of thousands of arrests every year for marijuana possession, and these arrests disproportionately affect the black community. A black person is nearly 3 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession in New Jersey than a white person, despite the fact that the usage rates are practically the same. Let me give you a little history. The Get Tough approach to crime that began in the Nixon administration and intensified with Ronald Reagan's declaration of the war on drugs has devastated black America. New Jersey's own war on marijuana has also been a failure. In its path, we find the long-term exclusion many offenders face. The potential consequences of marijuana arrest in New Jersey include up to 6 months in jail, loss of job and driving privileges, a criminal record, over $1,200 in fines and fees, an arrest warrant if those fees aren't paid, job discrimination, and threatened loss of public housing and student loans. Across this country, 2.3 million people are behind bars, 4.8 million others are on probation or on parole, to say nothing of the millions more whose criminal records stigmatized them for life. Marijuana prohibition is an important piece of that picture. The war on marijuana has failed, and this failure has had a devastating impact on black families. This extraordinary phenomenon has opened eyes of many across this state and our country, and has made the majority agree that legalizing, taxing, and regulating marijuana is an important piece of fixing our state and country's addiction and using the criminal justice system to deal with our problems. In 2010, right here in New Jersey, our government wasted more than $127 million on criminal justice costs enforcing marijuana possession laws. So today, and moving forward, the NAACP will work diligently as part of this campaign to educate New Jerseyans about how the status quo has failed our communities, especially our black communities. And we will work to ensure that a portion of the revenue that results from the taxation and regulated system will be reinvested into our communities that have been most impacted by the enforcement. Our schools, drug prevention, treatment programs, job training, and more. New Jersey must legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana to end the harms caused by our current laws, create jobs, increase public safety, and generate revenue that will help all New Jerseyans. It is time to end prohibition again. Thank you.
And now, Dr. David Nathan, a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association who practices in Princeton and is a clinical associate professor at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you all for being here. Good morning, I'm Dr. David Nathan. In my role as a general adult psychiatrist, I've seen too many cases of lives ruined by marijuana. Not so much by the drug itself, but by a justice system that chooses a sledgehammer to kill a weed. Marijuana prohibition began in the 1930s based on bad science and scare tactics that claimed that it was highly addictive, made users violent, and was fatal in overdose. The medical community now agrees that none of these assertions are true. Marijuana is less addictive than alcohol and tobacco. It actually makes users less likely to commit acts of violence. And there are no documented cases of marijuana overdose. In short, marijuana never should have been illegal for consenting adults in the first place. Marijuana is unsafe for young people and a small minority of adult users, but alcohol and tobacco pose a far greater threat to our public health. The great majority of adults experience no harm from the occasional use of marijuana. This opinion is shared by a majority of my colleagues, and a recent national poll showed that a majority of American physicians now favor legalization. Thoughtful doctors understand that you don't have to be pro-marijuana to be against its prohibition. Those who believe cannabis to be a gateway drug fail to appreciate that the illegal purchase of marijuana exposes consumers to dealers who also sell highly dangerous drugs. The consumption of hard drugs could actually decrease if marijuana were purchased at a regulated store where employees check for government-issued ID, rather than on the street corner where marijuana is sold to our children, along with heroin and cocaine. No one, including New Jersey United for Marijuana Reform, wants children and teens to think that the legalization of marijuana for adults implies that it's safe for them. But by making it illegal for everyone, we are most definitely sending the message that there is no difference in use by children and adults. By creating a legal distinction between use by adults and minors, and by investing marijuana tax revenue into sensible, evidence-based education of children and teens, we will convey that what is a permissible activity for adults is neither safe nor legal for minors. And we know that this kind of preventive drug education works. The rates of tobacco use among young people has been falling for many years, even though it has always been legal for adults to purchase tobacco. For decades, more than 80% of high school seniors have reported that marijuana is very easy or fairly easy to obtain. Prohibition clearly has not worked to keep marijuana away from minors, and it's time for a new approach. I ask my fellow New Jerseyans to forget the antiquated dogma, listen to the science, and judge marijuana prohibition's failure for themselves. The only rational approach to cannabis is to legalize, tax, and regulate it. Thank you.
And now, wrapping it up, Bill Caruso, Managing Director at Archer Public Affairs, and former Executive Director of the New Jersey Assembly.
Good morning, and thank you, Karen. Thank you, my fellow compatriots in this effort. I've spent most of my adult life working in government. In fact, right after college, got my first job working for a United States congressman. I more recently worked at the state level. And I will tell you, in all of my experience in this almost 20 years of being involved in government, I don't know that I've ever seen an issue that attracts such a diversity of supporters from the varied political, socioeconomic, religious, and cultural backgrounds that we see on this issue. And I think this phenomenon is most well represented by the individuals that you see behind us today. And that's really what attracted me to working with this group. This is not my first time working on this issue. I spent time at the federal level, and I had the benefit of working with pioneers in this movement in the late 90s and around the turn of the century. This was a time when medicinal marijuana wasn't a popular cause. And I watched these pioneers in this movement change the court of public opinion on this issue. I also watched as a staffer in a tear-filled meeting with two pioneers of this movement, Jim and his late wife, Cheryl Miller, convince a congressman who was adamant in his opposition to medicinal marijuana change his mind through their personal advocacy and their courageous acts of spending their time on this issue. I've worked at the state level in my more recent life implementing the state's first medicinal marijuana law. I was, as Karen mentioned, the executive director of the Assembly when that bill passed in 2009. I would say this to you, and despite our best efforts provide as much relief as possible to the patients that require this treatment, we've really fallen short. There is always going to be one other ailment, one other affliction, new medical research that's going to demonstrate why this drug can be used to treat PTSD, or this drug can be used to treat a variety of different ailments that we're not going to be able to articulate and prescribe in the law. And I think that's really what's led to me on the topic of medicinal, and a lot of others in the movement. Ken Walski's here, who represents some of the medicinal movement going on in New Jersey, to really turn that effort now to legalization. The easiest way to help get marijuana to those that need it for a medicinal purpose is to make sure that it's legal, rather than trying to do these backflips that we've been doing in the law. So for that end, I feel this is the right time and the right place. But in addition, we also look at what's going on in our state and what's going on nationally. The tide is turning on this. Legalization of marijuana is going to be here in our lifetime. It will come to New Jersey, it will come to our nation. It's happened. We can see it. Currently, we have 4 states and the District of Columbia that have already legalized. This is a progression. It's a natural progression. And I think it's our obligation now to be a part of this and helping to steer this in the right direction here in our state. I think one of the main reasons why we're experiencing this phenomenon is it's really common sense. You've heard the testimony here today from a variety of different people. You'll continue to hear this. In government, there's an old saying, right, about common sense reforms. This is part of that discussion now. And I think when you look at this issue in particular, and you look at all the things going on in our nation and in Trenton, this does become common sense. The idea that we're spending dollar after dollar fighting this losing battle, which is money that could be redirected to so many different causes, a lot of which you're going to hear about in this state in the coming weeks. Our budget process for the next year is going to begin. We have a conversation going on about the Transportation Trust Fund and its insolvency looming towards this summer. We have conversations going about pension and health care benefits and the like. There is no shortage of problems in Trenton or at the national level that don't require some fiscal input of one nature or another. So this is another discussion, another place to have a debate upon how we can be refunding some of our priorities in the state, redirecting some of the assets that we utilize on a regular basis to chase good after bad on this issue, and start reallocating that money to benefit the people of the state. I am extremely proud to be a part of this effort, and I look forward to continuing to grow this as we go and successfully taxing and regulating marijuana in the state of New Jersey. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to open it up to questions.
Many of you have spent time in the State House, you currently do, Bill mentioned it. You guys know how this works. Governor Christie has sworn that he will not allow something like this to come to New Jersey. Tactically speaking, how do you make this happen?
Two answers to that question. I think in my statement, I mentioned to you that I watched, and I've seen this before, not just on this issue, whether it's an elected official at the state level or somewhere else, people change their minds, okay? And I'm not saying that's where the governor is or will be, but we can't just stop because somebody has said, this is where I am. I think it's our job to create a responsible debate. More to that point, though, our goal right now is not the state House. Our goal is you all, the public, right? The people of this state. I think our first job is to articulate a message to the voting public, the taxpayers of the state, about what we're trying to accomplish and why. I think beyond that, right, that's where you get to the next level of sitting down with those that are going to implement or enact these policies. There's a variety of different ways a bill becomes a law, right, in the process. We're not at that stage yet. Our stage right now is to announce this beginning, the start of this effort, and really to take our messaging direct to the public and let people know that this is why. This is why this is necessary, this is why the timing's right, and join us in this cause.
So wait, let me add to that. Look, Governor Christie has said on numerous occasions that the war on drugs has failed. Well, the reality is that the war on drugs has become a war on marijuana. In New Jersey, about 50% of all drug arrests are for marijuana possession, resulting in more than 21,000 marijuana arrests a year in New Jersey, with collateral consequences that include loss of employment, a criminal record for adults for up to 5 years, loss of student financial aid, loss of housing. Governor Christie has actually been a leader in the country talking about the importance of removing these types of collateral consequences and the importance of ending the failed war on drugs. Well, here in New Jersey, the war on drugs has in many ways become a war on marijuana. And we look forward to working with Governor Christie on doing what he has advocated for, and that is ending the failed war on drugs.
Besides using us right here, right now, to get that you all will be doing this, how will you all get the message out to the people? In what ways? What ways are you talking?
Look, we have here a representation from every corner of the state. The ACLU New Jersey has tens of thousands of supporters living literally in every county in the state. The NAACP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, the many endorsing organizations that represent this coalition, and that list will be growing. So what we are going to do, we're going to educate New Jerseyans about facts versus fiction, because unfortunately so much of the knowledge about marijuana comes from fiction, and it comes from years of failed science, and we're going to mobilize New Jerseyans. We're going to get them to act, whether they're in Cape May County or Sussex County. And what everyone needs to remember is that public opinion is on our side. The majority of Americans over the past several years have consistently said that they believe that marijuana should be legal. And that represents a significant tide shift. When Gallup began polling this issue in the 1970s, support for marijuana legalization was in the 20s. In the past 3 years alone, that support has been over 50%. In some years, it's at 58%. So the majority of Americans believe that marijuana should be legal. Meanwhile, New Jersey makes more than 21,000 arrests a year. And by the way, the 21,000 arrests a year in New Jersey is more arrests than far more populous states like Pennsylvania and Ohio. So we make more arrests in New Jersey per capita than other states do.
Mobilize how? Like ads, rallies, what are you talking?
Yes, everything you just said.
Yeah, can I just?
When you listen to Governor Christie make his argument against legalization of recreational use, inevitably he cites the Northwestern study, who says he's not going to be the governor that allows legalization that's going to wreck children's minds. So how would you address this issue? Because it's one of his major points when he talks about not legalizing.
David Nathan, the physician. I'll take this one. So I've written numerous articles for the Wall Street Journal and CNN and other news outlets talking about this issue of legalization. I spoke about this on NJTV in their story Due Process, or in their show Due Process. And I have very consistently, in every forum that I've been given the opportunity, I've been very clear that there is the potential for harm to young people if they use marijuana. And I want to make sure that that's clear from the medical perspective, because there is evidence of that. I would also state as emphatically that for the great majority of adults, there is no problem. But that's not your question. Your question is about the kids. So the question is, if we legalize marijuana, what's going to become of our children? Well, first of all, 80% of high school seniors for decades now report that they do have access to marijuana if they want it. So if our goal of prohibition is to keep marijuana away from kids, it has failed. And in fact, I would argue that the 80-year prohibition against marijuana that we've had, if anything, has raised its status as a forbidden fruit for young people. And there's a policy researcher in Washington, D.C. by the name of Dr. Sanho Tree, and he has said that he wants to see marijuana made boring. He wants to see marijuana become an uninteresting drug, kind of along the lines of when your mother is now on Facebook. You don't want to be on Facebook. And so when it becomes legal for adults, and it becomes no big deal anymore for adults, and we stop hearing the snickering about it in the press, I think that's going to have an effect on young people who, up until now, those who oppose legalization have repeatedly said, well, we don't want to send a bad message to our kids. I've got news for those people. We have been sending a bad message to those kids, because we have been saying that marijuana is bad for everybody. That's why it's illegal for everybody. Nobody here is talking about making marijuana legal for children. Nobody here is talking about wanting children to use marijuana. What we are talking about is making that legal distinction between adults over 21 and minors under 21. Adults for whom marijuana is, in the great majority of individuals, not harmful, and under 21, where brain development can indeed be affected by marijuana use. And by restricting points of access to marijuana, by taking it off the street corner where marijuana is sold by drug dealers who, many of you may know, drug dealers do not ask for ID to make sure that you're old enough to be buying this stuff. They sell it. That's their job. They have no compunction about selling it to kids because they're already breaking the law. If you take the point of access, the point of sale, off of the street corner, out of the park, and put it behind the counter in a retail establishment that is regulated and taxed, then you are going to find that the access to children is not going to go up, maybe go down. In addition, the taxation of marijuana, I think, is actually key, because we know that preventive education works. We know that in the same time that marijuana has overall grown in popularity while the entire time remaining illegal for everyone, tobacco, which has been legal for adults, the use of that has been falling. My mother was a school teacher in an elementary school, and I remember when the smoke-free class of 2000 campaign began. Some of you may remember that. That campaign worked, not by making tobacco illegal for adults, of course. It worked by giving kids realistic, evidence-based, scientific, and appropriate education about the harms of smoking, and frankly, making it a lot less cool. That's what we need to do with marijuana in order to protect our children. Not to continue the status quo, which has failed, but rather to educate, to restrict points of access, and that is how we're going to make a difference.
If you can't convince the governor of your point of view, what kind of timeline, what's your urgency? Are you willing to wait him out so that he will pursue other ambitions that might take him out of state and out of your way?
There are so many different possibilities in terms of where we can be successful. It's not necessarily the primary goal right now, nor is this a direct appeal to the governor or anybody else in government right now. And I I go back to the point, I think Udi underscored it very well. There's a broad coalition that's growing, right? Our first step, and the gentleman asked the question of getting our message out. It's the most important part of this right now. It's folks like you see standing behind us, right, that have the courage to come out and talk about this, that have the ability to come out and talk about this and share their stories. And I will find, and I've already seen this in my own social media, people coming out of the woodwork, and this is going to create a dialogue, and we're going to find there are more people that are in support of this than are against it. Now, in terms of our governor, right? Our governor is our governor right now. I don't know how long that's going to be. Maybe the full term, it may not. But I think our focus is not the governor. Our focus is this movement. Our focus is taking this message to the people and building support, person by person, group by group, community by community. And I think we're already doing that. So from that standpoint, I think we start here today. And where we go next, I think, is going to be a question about how successful we are in getting this message in.
Are you hoping to accomplish this by a ballot referendum, or would you try to get just a law passed by both houses of the legislature?
I think it's...
And then secondly, how would you tax it? Would it be taxed the same way as cigarettes, alcohol, a new tax? You can answer both those questions, I appreciate it.
Sure, in terms of the procedure to legalize this, I think that's an open question. And frankly, I think we're going to defer at some point to the elected officials, right, and how that process is going to work. We're not at that place yet. There are pieces of legislation already introduced that I think are interesting starting points, and we can work off of those, but we're not here endorsing any method or any particular bill at this point. I think it's going to be a conversation. And your second point...
About how you would tax it, would it be taxed the same way as cigarettes, alcohol, something totally different?
I think it's
and
going to...
how do you get the number $100 million that you put in?
Yeah, thanks.
So first of all, when you talk about the taxation system, look, we have the privilege here in New Jersey of being able to look at the experience now of 4 states and the District of Columbia. And the challenge with the taxation is you wanna make sure that it leads to a regulated system, while at the same time you also want to make sure that people don't continue relying on the black market. So we are going to look at the experience of Colorado. We're going to look, which last year I think posted about $70 million. I could share with you the formula. I mean, there's an excise tax on it.
But is it taxed the same way as a cigarette?
No, there's an excise tax. So it's in addition to the regular sales taxes. So every state has done it differently, I think is the main point. And here in New Jersey, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the experience of all those states and make sure we do the system that's right for New Jersey. Now, when we say revenue will be more than $100 million, I would actually say that that's a very conservative estimate. Given the population of our state, given the metropolitan centers of New York City, of Philadelphia, that is a very conservative estimate. Colorado itself, which is a significantly smaller state, I think it has a population of about 5.5 million, in its first full year, generated about $60 to $70 million in revenue for the state, in new revenue. And it's not even fully operational in Colorado yet. So given that our state is significantly larger than Colorado, we have metropolitan centers that are outside of our state, but would come here for those purposes. I think that it's saying more than $100 million in new revenue is actually a very conservative estimate.
It would seem to follow that legalizing marijuana would increase the illegal market for drugs. Is there any research in this country, or maybe in other countries, that demonstrates that?
I mean, here is the tension with citing to that kind of research. This is brand new still. Colorado has had an operational system for just over a year. Washington for even less. Oregon and Alaska just legalized it. Washington D.C. just legalized it. So we're not able to answer that question yet.
Other countries have?
So Uruguay is the first country in the world to legalize marijuana, and again, it's a relatively new experience.
As a coalition of organizations printing signs, Bill talked about.
Are they nice? By the way, we have a website, NJUMR.org.
You have a website. Bill talked about a campaign, a multimedia campaign, I guess. Where does the money come from on this?
people like you. Look, today is the beginning of an effort that's going to be here to stay until we win. We are going to raise enough money to be able to achieve our victory. And the money is going to come from everyday New Jerseyans. You know, the ACLU of New Jersey has more than 11,000 individual donors in New Jersey. We have tens of thousands of people in New Jersey that care about racial justice, that care about criminal justice reform, that care about ending our mass incarceration system. It is folks like that and tens of thousands more who are going to contribute to this campaign and make sure that we win.
Does the website actually solicit donations?
There is a donate button, which I encourage you to click on the website. And the website is NJUMR.org and also NJMarijuanaReform.org. They both end up on the same page.
Hi, I'm a medical marijuana patient in New Jersey. My name is Lefty Grimes. Governor Christie did not disseminate the Attorney General guidelines for medical marijuana to his people. So it's causing patients around the state to get arrested. So what we've been doing as patients is going around and delivering these Attorney General guidelines at $5 a pop to each police department. We've done about 30 police departments so far. We video each one. It's called the Ignorance is No Excuse Tour. The problem is there are prosecutors prosecuting medical marijuana patients. Up in Sparta, up in Lodi, there's a HIV positive patient whose neighbor turned her in for smoking a joint. Police came in and kicked the door in, took her computer, took her money, took her medical marijuana, took her bongs, took her car. Now she has to pay money to get her stuff back through civil forfeiture. And this is still going on in Lodi. Scott Vasilik is a patient in Sparta. Went to the police because he was stabbed, went for help, was arrested by the police for medical marijuana. What do you plan to do about rogue prosecutors going after medical marijuana patients?
Lefty, first of all, thanks for your advocacy on this, because you guys are one of the pioneers. You've been out there, and the organization's been there. But I think this dovetails nicely in the point we were raising earlier, that one of the problems is we have a quasi-legal system already, right, for medicinal patients. But there's a whole lot of hoops you got to jump through. This answers the question, right? If we legalize marijuana, you're not going to have these problems anymore. These individuals that you talked about aren't going to run into this. There's a question in terms of whether or not these prosecutors are acting sort of in ignorance to a law, whether these regs were provided to them or not. These are not going to be questions if we're in this place and we're successful. So the best way I can answer your question is that's why we're standing here today.
Have you gotten to the point where you've discussed the specific regulations as to perhaps how much a person could possess and under what circumstances somebody should not be under the influence, and how you would be able to tell?
Sure. So we have some general principles that we've agreed to make up to 1 ounce of marijuana for personal possession by adults legal, to allow for up to 6 plants in a person's household for personal use by adults. Marijuana use will continue to be illegal while driving. It will continue to be prohibited in public. It will be very much restricted for anyone under the age of 21. And we have a lot of very creative ideas that haven't been done in other states on how to make sure that youth or children will never get their hands on marijuana. So yes, we have a lot of general principles.
Speaking to the county prosecutor yesterday who had concerns about how you would be able to determine if, for instance, somebody driving was under the influence of drugs because of the fact that the THC stays in somebody's system for a long time period. And he had concerns on how this would work.
I saw those questions, and they were good questions. Right now, we prosecute people for driving under the influence of drugs, usually using police officers trained as drug recognition experts. We will continue to do that. Technology is also advancing where the THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana, that particular drug can actually be measured with new technology in the bloodstream. So we are quickly advancing to the place where we will be able to very easily, or reasonably easily, determine whether someone is driving under the influence of drugs like specifically marijuana. So in the long term, that is not really a major concern. We are already prosecuting people who are driving under the influence of drugs other than alcohol.
What technology does exist to say that the THC in this person's system didn't come from smoking a joint like a week ago as opposed to an hour ago?
That I'm not aware of specific technology as to when marijuana was ingested. It is true that marijuana stays in the system some time after it's used, but the effects and the psychophysical activities of a marijuana user do not remain days or weeks afterwards. So I think it's a combination of determining someone being under the influence by how they're conducting themselves and how they're being tested by a drug recognition expert, coupled with the fact that whether or not they have a particular level of THC in their bloodstream.
And I just want to emphasize, while the science and technology may not be there yet in the same way that we could find a blood alcohol level when someone is driving, although we believe that technology will get there, there are scientifically evidence-based ways to figure out whether someone is under the influence of drugs while driving. And here in New Jersey, we have police personnel who are trained in identifying that. In the states of Colorado and Washington, the experience has been that people are able to identify. I'll give you one statistic. In Colorado, traffic fatalities have decreased significantly since marijuana was legalized there. So there are ways, but it is absolutely a challenge. We're not minimizing that challenge. And what we want to do here in New Jersey is to look at the experience of other states and to implement the fairest, safest, and most effective system for our state.
If this measure is passed, is there going to be a positive situation involving corrections? Mr. Smith, can you answer this question, please? A favorable situation involving the Department of Corrections and the division of the urban areas. Could you mention we have 40 branches throughout the state?
Well, I think that we're going to see, when the revenue comes in, I believe we're going to see a tremendous amount of savings because we're not going to be spending $127 million prosecuting marijuana offenses. So we'll be able to take the revenue and make sure that revenue goes back to the communities. We talked earlier about how, excuse me, how African Americans were 3 times more likely to be arrested. It has devastated our community. So what we have to ensure is that when the revenue does come in and the legislation is written, that those who have been most adversely affected, that they are not disregarded in regards to fixing our communities, educating our children, rebuilding our inner cities, infrastructure, etc. So I believe that that's where we're going to see the benefit in regards to our community and from a prosecution standpoint.
Thank you so much.
Great.
We're going to end questions right now.
Thank you, everyone.